into the abyss, also known as the Cave of Death. Descending the Gouffre Berger is a true journey to the centre of the earth. Located in the southeast of France, this resurgence is one of the most feared by explorers, so much so that it is known as the Cave of Death. More than 1,200 metres, or 3,947 feet deep, with massive lakes inside. It is one of the deepest underground limestone caves in the world. There are sheer drops to descend, as well as passages flooded with water. Because of Gouffre Berger's limestone walls, water can easily penetrate the cave, making it liable to flooding after heavy rainfall, creating a death trap for anyone left inside. 6 people have lost their lives here, 5 due to the flooding issues I just mentioned. Once the bottom is reached, there's a real eerie sense of being somewhere very deep underground. To return from the bottom of the cave back to the surface, it can take anywhere between 15 and 30 hours, without long breaks. As you continue through the cave, there are the initials of the original explorers in the last flooded cavern. That's the end for dry cavers. After that, if you dare to go any further, you have to put on diving gear to explore the totally flooded tunnels. Still, it is regarded as a must-do for cavers around the globe, and the Oxford University Cave Club were about to attempt it. This is Nicolas Dollimore's story, and the Gouffre Berger disaster. The bright young adventurers of the Oxford University Cave Club plumb some of the deepest cave systems in the subterranean world. The OUCC is long one of Britain's most prominent caving clubs. Founded in 1957, it made its first forays into the Picos Mountains in 1961. The club has seen countless successful international expeditions, but unfortunately, from time to time, they die doing so. A bitter reminder left by the 1996 Gouffre Berger expedition. Nicolas Dollimore, currently aged 30, from Ramsbottom in Lancashire, was a geography student at Oxford University from 1983 to 1986. It's here she would discover the Oxford University Cave Club, OUCC, and her passion for caving. Nicola was still in her teens when she first took on a pioneering role in expeditions to Spain in the 80s. Her efforts would not go unnoticed either. The Club Tankard Award is given to the most notable or notorious OUCC member of the year, and Nicola would go on to win the award in 1985. As time passed, although not actively involved in club expeditions, she kept in touch with the OUCC through the years, whilst creating a name for herself as one of Britain's top potholers, as well currently working as a lecturer at the University of Liverpool's School of Tropical Medicine. This is where the Gouffre Berger expedition comes into the story. The OUCC had been planning the Gouffre Berger club trip for more than 2 years. This was considered a routine tourist caving trip. As mentioned previously, Nicola was not currently involved in OUCC expeditions. It was only at the last minute where a fellow member, a part of the team, withdrew from the expedition, which opened a spot for one more caver. Being very popular amongst the club, the OUCC had the perfect person in mind and acquired Nicola for the 1996 Gouffre Berger expedition. On Saturday, July the 6th, 1996, Nicola and the OUCC arrived on the site of the Gouffre Berger. The entrance is within the commune of Enghien, high on the Vercors Plateau in southeastern France, located about 10 kilometers west of Grenoble. The walk to the Berger is complicated and leads through pine forests for 3 kilometers over limestone pavements and well-worn, but not always obvious routes. The entrance pitch is a mossy depression in an area of limestone pavement. Whilst on site, the club met a group of 4 divers, also planning to explore the cave, now making it 6 experienced divers who were about to attempt the daunting task of the Berger. 2 British, William Steed, 36, and Nicolas Dollimore, 30, and 4 Hungarians, István Torda, aged 23, Nimith Zsolt, aged 26, Miklos Nergis, aged 28, and Karoli Tompa, aged 24. discovered on the 24th of May 1953 by Joseph Berger and Mark Guthrie, the Guthrie Berger has a long history of expeditions. This was the first cave in the world to be explored below 1,000 meters or 3,281 feet depth, and is still a challenge for most cavers today. Before we dive deep into this tragic story, it should be noted that not all expeditions here end in tragedy. In 1967, Ken Pierce, a metallurgy lecturer from Britain, descended with the Pegasus Caving Club team from Nottingham, UK, organised and led by Peter Watkinson, and along with a 40-metre or 130-foot dive, reached a depth of 1,133 metres or 3,717 feet. They emerged after 13 days underground, having set a new world record at the time. In addition, in 1990, a breakthrough was made, connecting the cave to the nearby Scalet de la Fromagerie, the less used but highest entrance of the cave. But, as mentioned earlier, in recent years there have been 6 fatalities in this cave, 5 due to water, in turn negatively shifting the once positive dynamic that surrounded the Guthrie Berger. With all the necessary pre-checks in place, the group begin the descent into Guthrie Berger on Saturday the 6th of July, 1996. The plan was to reach the bottom of the cave before eventually making their way back to the top by the following day, on Sunday, July the 7th, 1996. The weather was foreboding. Knowing this, the team nevertheless decided to continue on into the Berger at midday. While descending, they came across another team of British cavers who on Friday had to wait a whole 12 hours for the flooding inside the cave to lessen, so they could surface. It should be noted that the deeper the team descended, the less communication they would have with the outside world, due to the simple reason that ordinary radios will not work underground. Nevertheless, with all the warning signs, the team continue with their exploration. It was a very arduous task carrying and moving their equipment and food supplies down vertical shafts, across small lakes and down a mountainside terrain named the Great Rubble Heap. In addition, they had to thread their way down through a maze of huge boulders, carrying very heavy loads on their backs for about 500 meters down to Camp 1 at the bottom, where the team decided it would be best to stop for the day and camp for the night. Unfortunately for them, danger was looming right around the corner. Although the weather was fine when they left, unbeknownst to the group, heavy rain caused by a severe thunderstorm had fallen continuously the previous night, producing the worst floods in that region for some years. Water surged into the cave with swiftness. On the higher peaks, this appeared as a freak snowstorm, which also delayed the Tour de France cycle race in the region. As mentioned earlier, during a storm or heavy rain, the Guthrie Berger can become a dangerous trap as the water levels rise very quickly. A very dangerous situation the group was about to find themselves in. On July the 7th, 1996, after a long night's rest, the team continue exploring the bottommost reaches of the Guthrie Berger. Truly a wonder of the earth, the cave contains some of the largest passages and best formations in the world. Unfortunately for the group, the flood started to catch up with them, making it impossible to savour the beautiful wonders of the cave. Panicked about the ever-changing situation, in an impulse decision, they split up into 2 groups of 3, as the shafts start to become impassable. The first group is comprised completely of Hungarians, István Torda, 23, Nimith Zolt, 26, and Miklos Nevergis, 28. The second group is comprised of 1 Hungarian, Karoli Tompa, 24, and 2 British, Nicola Dollimore, 30, and another fellow OUCC member, William Steed, 36. The pothole began to feel like a bucket as the exhausted cavers tried to scramble to safety. Now divided, the 2 groups pack up and start hastily making their way back to the surface. The first group is stopped by water from a tributary river 1,000 meters deep that is quickly flooding. The situation would not prove better for Group 2. The second group, with William in the lead, arrive at the Puy de l'Oregon, where they give up and decide to find a different way back towards the surface. On their new route, the second group crossed the Grand Canyon and arrived at the Cascade de Topographe, all whilst the water levels still continued dangerously rising. William succeeds in climbing up the pitch and up the 2 meters ledge following it. Nicola and Pivo following close behind, attempting to do the same. With all her might, Nicola tried to get up the 5-foot diagonal rope when she conveyed to William and Pivo that she didn't think she would make it. William tried to encourage her, but at about 800 meters down the cave, Nicola's jammer impeded her leaving a traverse. All the while, the water is falling more and more quickly and stronger around her. She is clipped onto the traverse line practically underneath the gushing waterfall. Stuck and unable to move, this situation continues to deteriorate. To get over the ledge, she would need an incredible amount of force or use ascenders, but with neither, she is completely trapped. Through all of this, Nicola kept her cool and collected demeanor. As the water continued to dangerously rise, William shouted to Nicola to try and get down, realizing they would be better off in the chamber they had just come from. He then sat on a boulder to try to keep the water away from her, but was washed off twice. In the horrifying words of William Steed, the situation turned from a simple problem into an emergency in just a few minutes. I started to get seriously worried, wondering what the hell I could do. Nicola was very calm. I went back to Nicola, but this time I couldn't get near her. I saw water go over her head and heard her scream. At this point, I couldn't do any more. I was in a precarious situation. William and Pivo tried to help, but were unable to do so, and had to climb up to escape the increasing volume of water. Nicola was swept back into the freezing water and pulled half a mile underground. At roughly 9 p.m, Nicola drowned, still attached to the rope, bent in two, her face hanging by her bare feet, her shoes stripped away by the water. William rests trapped between Nicola's corpse and the next waterfall, Cascade Claudine, until Tuesday, while Pivo remains stuck at the summit of the Cascade de Topographe. Unaware of the tragedy below them, the first team is still stripping the cave of equipment as water levels continue to rise. They are able to climb up the cascade to 27 meters, but realize that they will never be able to make it up to the next ledge, the Resort de Sange, which is flooded with water. With no other choice, they decide to go back down the cascade to 27 meters. The first to do so is Istvan, who arrives at a rebelay 15 meters above the next ledge. Unable to continue due to the torrent of water around him, he also dies attached to the rebelay by his cowstail. The other two Hungarians rest at the pitch head, struggling to stay above water. One of them has to stand on a single pedal to survive. Exhausted and hypothermic, the survivors were left with no choice but to wait for rescuers, clinging to their ropes. But as mentioned previously, because the group was so deep underground, the radios would not be able to function, effectively rendering them useless. The agonizing hours turned into days. The survivors' batteries ran out, and they were in total darkness, without food. Fortunately for the group, when the party did not appear on the Monday night of the 8th of July 1996, cavers above ground noticed and authorities were alerted, initiating the rescue recovery. The disaster was first announced by the mayor of Engins on Wednesday the 10th of July 1996. Rescuers were initially prevented from entering the cave due to the sheer volume of water, but eventually found William and Pivo that evening, exhausted and hypothermic. William was utterly exhausted, cold and unable to move. He was still 1,900 foot below ground and too ill to come up. Therefore, he was taken to a dry cavern to rest, where both him and Pivo were treated medically on site, given high-energy food and warmed up, and then escorted to the surface, largely under their own steam. Due to the nature of the cave, William had to muster up enough strength as possible because the rescuers could not carry him out due to the reason that the cave becomes too difficult and narrow. Therefore, he must help himself and use the ropes. William, who spent 3 days on a ledge awaiting help, would go on to say, "I'm extremely lucky to have got out." William emerged on Thursday the 11th of July 1996 and was helicoptered to hospital in Grenoble. Doctors said he was in excellent physical condition, but very tired. William was saved by the rope wrapped around his body. It was so tight it cut into his legs, preventing any circulation. Pivo got out on Friday the 12th of July, 1996, and was taken to a local gîte. As for the three Hungarians lower down the cave, at -900 meters, István had been deceased for a number of days now, while Kuchar and Mora were found very exhausted and hypothermic. Rescuers spent a long time warming them up before getting them out of the cave over the weekend of the 13th to the 14th of July 1996. Kuchar managed to come up mostly under his own steam and was recovering well. Mora needed the use of a stretcher. A suspension in a harness had injured his legs. Many people were involved in the rescue, several policemen and firemen, but mostly volunteers from the SSF, the Spilier Secours Français, the French equivalent of the CRO. At the present time, on July the 15th, 1996, there are over 200 people on the site, including 177 SSF volunteers. The bodies of Nicola and István have not been recovered, and work is in progress to do this before detackling. Nicola's body was found on Wednesday, July the 17th, 1996, by a French rescue team deep in the extensive cave system. The body of István was found soon afterwards. Because of this tragedy, the Nicola phone, an ultra-long-wave device, was developed by Graham Naylor, an Oxford caver of the 80s generation, created to allow communication from both camps to the surface. It is housed in a small, waterproof case and is connected to an aerial or wire extending along the passage for 100 feet in each direction. Nicola's husband, Nick Perrin, financed the Nicola phone's development in the hope that if cavers could communicate with the surface, future tragedies like hers might be averted. This is a story of unfortunate events. The club members on the trip were ranked among the UK's best cavers. This was considered a routine tourist caving trip. The party were nevertheless very well prepared and equipped and were physically fit. This disaster was a freak of nature, similar to an avalanche for mountaineers. Nevertheless, the caving community was able to make something positive out of an horrific ending. May Nicola and István rest in peace. We will take a look at a story known by many cave divers around the world as the 1973 Mount Gambier accident. On May the 26th, 1973, John Beckerman, Peter Burr, Larry Reynolds, Gordon Roberts, Robert Smith, and the three Millett siblings, Christine Millett, Glenn Millett, and Stephen Millett, all arrived at Mount Gambier in South Australia with their eyes, heart, and mind set on one thing only: to dive a deep-water cave called the Shaft. None could have been prepared for the horrors that were about to unfold. Now, with all that said, let's get into today's tragic tale about 8 divers who dared to test the dark bottomless tunnels of the Shaft. The discovery of the deadly shaft was by complete accident when, in 1938, a confused farmer checked why his horse had suddenly tripped up in the empty field. There he found a small patch of ground about 1 foot across that had given way to a sinkhole that went down far deeper than one could test without proper equipment. As the news of the shaft started to spread, adventurous divers travelled from afar to see what all the fuss was about. The first dive into the shaft was around the mid-60s, when a local diver descended 69 feet into the massive clear water cave, through the now 3-foot wide opening. Many divers followed suit, squeezing their bodies through the tiny sinkhole. The main chamber has a depth of 460 feet and a width of 263 feet at its narrowest point. The entry point is about 20 feet below ground level. Consequently, divers and their equipment had to be carefully lowered into the water from above. Directly under the opening is a rock pile with 2 dark tunnels descending from both sides. One faces the northwest and goes 260 feet down, and the other faces the east and has a maximum depth of 407 feet. The group decided a day after arriving, on the 27th, that they would complete a practice dive in the shaft. tracing the guideline around 150 feet to the rock pile below. They swiftly scanned around the pile before heading back to the surface to prepare for the main dive the following day. On the 28th of May 1973, the divers arrived, thrilled, at the dive site ready to explore the cave. Soon after, they lowered themselves on the guideline they had prepared a day earlier. Robert Smith, the more skilled diver out of the group, said in a personal statement that they planned to go no further than the edge of the rock pile, especially making sure to avoid both tunnels adjacent to the rock pile. Experienced divers know to go beyond the rock pile, a special blend of gases is needed in your tanks to make sure you don't succumb to nitrogen narcosis. Nitrogen narcosis is a drowsy state induced by breathing nitrogen under higher pressure. This causes the diver to experience an effect similar to alcohol intoxication. The deeper you go, the greater the effects, which significantly impair your cognitive and bodily functions, in several cases leading to drowning and death. Close to the foundation of the rock pile at 180 feet, Robert began to feel the effects of nitrogen narcosis. With his knowledge on its effect, Robert signaled to the group that he was going to swim back to the top of the rock pile. While the rest of the group continued exploring, Robert waited patiently swimming around the top of the rock pile. Glenn Millett would then return and convey to Robert that he's running out of air. Robert and Glenn then hurried back to the surface where they found Larry Reynolds already waiting for them. Minutes later, Peter Burrows surfaced with his oxygen tank completely empty. Glenn, knowing that the other 4 divers still in the cave would be in the same predicament, strapped on a spare tank and went searching for them. Arriving about 230 feet under the surface, he would find the lights and camera of his brother, Stefan Millett, but could see no more than 12 inches in front of his mask. The whole area around him had been silted out from the group's initial descent. Glenn would try his best to find them, but in the present conditions, it was almost impossible. Defeated, he realized he would have to head back to the surface to avoid endangering his own life. Robert Smith also joined him, but he could not go beyond the drop-off at 225 feet due to the onset of nitrogen narcosis symptoms. At this point in the rescue, it was evident to the survivors that their friends and family were no longer alive. From this point on, they knew it would be a body recovery. The next day, the police sent in their dive team down around 200 feet but could not find anyone. Almost 8 months passed before the first body was located. The other 3 victims remained hidden in the cold and blind depths of the shaft. In total, 8 separate dives and light equipment was needed to recover the bodies. They were found ranging from the depths of 50 feet to 195 feet below the surface. It took almost a year of painstaking effort to recover all the bodies from the shaft. On this day, the lives of Stephen Millett, Christine Millett, Gordon Roberts and John Beckerman were lost. Everything is believed to have gone wrong for the 4 fatalities when they left the clear, sunlit main chamber towards a tunnel darkened by all the silt they stirred up. It is assumed that at this point, the victims were experiencing the effects of nitrogen narcosis so severely that it caused them to go deeper and deeper into the tunnel without realizing the dangers. As of today, they are the only known deaths in the shaft. This horrific event was a driving force in the creation of many safety corporations tasked with keeping cave divers safe. Regardless of this tragedy, the cave is seen as safe and takes many divers yearly. Sadly, it is another story of adventure gone wrong. Unfortunately, as long as the human race endures and walks hand in hand with curiosity, tragic stories like this will have many sequels to come. Greetings and welcome back to Gripping Horror. Saint-Pierre of Martinique was culturally and economically ahead of its time, being known as the Paris of the Caribbean. That was up until May the 8th, 1902, when the deadliest volcanic eruption of modern times wiped out the city in a matter of minutes. from a population of over 30,000 to a mere 2 survivors in the blink of an eye. The name Mount Pelée will forever send shivers down the spines of historians, forever to be immortalized in the history books. What makes this story even more tragic is that Mount Pelée signified signs of an eruption before it happened. The residents of Saint-Pierre had ample time to evacuate the city, but refused to take heed of the warnings. Martinique is located in the Lesser Antilles, a small group of islands in the eastern Caribbean Sea. You have to start by imagining how Saint-Pierre was at the turn of the century, not as it is now. At the peak of its popularity, it was a very prosperous society. It had spawned over a dozen millionaire estate owners, with visitors over the next centuries from the Spanish, French, Dutch, Danish, and English. The northern portion of the island was largely dominated by Mount Pelée, with its highest point reaching 4,583 feet. Before the 1902 eruption, as early as the summer of 1900, signs of increased activity were present, but minor, so it was thought to pose little threat to the towns that surrounded its coastline. Local residents were used to the occasional steam eruptions that came from the summit of the mountain. Indeed, inside the main summit crate, there was a lake of clear water that locals often used as a picnic spot. Saint-Pierre was a vibrant city of 30,000 people, with its theatre and grand parties hosting many guests. The main artery for this city was the waterfront. Nearly everything and everyone came and went by boat. However, by April 1902, enjoyment of life would start to decline for the residents of Saint-Pierre after unexpected activity of Mount Pelée. The steam, sulphur, and steady fall of ash coming from the summit was taking a toll on the residents' day-to-day life. This activity proceeded in the coming weeks of April, intensifying as time went on, until an expedition was initiated to investigate. Upon their ascent of the Mount Pelée, they discovered a low-sitting, previously dry crater, now full of bubbling sulfuric water. Yet the town of Saint-Pierre did not assess the situation as dangerous, making countless prints of their local newspapers, encouraging residents to keep calm and talk down on anyone who shared thoughts of leaving or doubt. By the time May rolled around, the situation had continued to deteriorate. Locals resorted to carrying handkerchiefs when going about their day because the stench of sulphur had now become so strong in the air that breathing became a grueling task. The animals also suffered. It was reported horses were dropping down in their harnesses, suffocated by the fumes produced by Mount Pelée. As if matters couldn't get any worse, the town was then infested by a plague of wild animals coming down the sides of the mountain in flock. A notable mention was the pit vipers. It was reported that 50 people were killed by snake bites alone in the days leading up to the eruption. By now, the town had turned into a ghost of its previous self. Skies were grey, ash filled the air, and dead animals littered in the streets. Yet people stayed, assured by the experts that Mount Pelée was not a threat to their livelihood. On the 5th of May, a mammoth-sized river of extremely hot mud overflowed the summit crater, flowing down the Rivière La Blanche, where it would engulf a sugarcane factory, killing 30 workers before plummeting into the sea just outside Saint-Pierre. Bizarrely, this incident had a calming effect on the town. Many thought this would be the climax of Mount Pelée, hoping that after this, things would surely return back to normal. The editor of Les Colonnades certainly thought so, going as far to write, "Where can one be better off than Saint-Pierre?" Efforts by the local newspaper and the governor, Louis Maton, to keep people in Saint-Pierre were highly influenced by the fast-approaching election. The last thing the governor needed was his voting base being absent on election day. The commission would continue to reassure the people that they had nothing to worry about. On May the 6th, a volcano on the neighbouring island of St. Vincent exploded, killing more than 1,000 people. As the news travelled the grapevine to Saint-Pierre, panic set in and commotion ensued. In response to this, the governor sent in troops to Saint-Pierre to restore order, but in actuality roadblocks were set up in the streets leading out of town to ensure there was no evacuation. Feeling the pressure, The governor and his family moved into St. Pierre on May the 7th to show the people how safe it was. Meanwhile, Mount Pelée only grew stronger. Enormous black clouds and flames roared from the summit crater, creating streaks of lightning across the sky. Ash fell like snow. Red-hot magma could now be seen by the crater rim, with the side of the mountain now glowing red. On the morning of the 8th, at 7:52 a.m., Mount Pelée exploded, releasing a massive cloud of extremely hot gas from the southwestern flank of the mountain. With no warning, the side of the volcano was ripped out and hurled towards the city. Waves of fire rolled down on St. Pierre and the ships, their only way of escape vanishing in front of their eyes. The wall of flame was a pyroclastic flow of superheated steam and poisonous gas that travelled 100 meters per second with a temperature of 1,820 degrees Fahrenheit. People were killed instantly. Anyone who managed to survive the initial blast would have suffered brief moments of excruciating agony while their skin started to peel and blood boiled, whilst choking on the superheated gas. Those by the harbour were not safe either. Men who jumped into the sea would hear their flesh sizzling as they drowned. Out of 18 ships on the harbour, only one was left in any condition to sail. All the others had been destroyed by the blast. St. Pierre lay in ruins. One of the first witnesses to enter the remains of the town described the scene. The whole town was reduced to a heap of smoking rubble. Walls were torn down, metal roofs ripped off, trees were stripped down to bare trunks. Charred bodies lay everywhere. We could see no sign of life. Not one living soul was to be seen in this desert of desolation. Photographs show a scene similar to that of Hiroshima after the bombings. Buildings destroyed, roads filled with debris, human remains charred to the bone, littering the streets. 30,000 people gone in just a few seconds. Incredibly, 2 people had survived. One was 28-year-old shoemaker Leon Leandre that would manage to survive by running indoors when the initial blast hit. Although others in the same room died within seconds, no one was able to explain his miraculous survival. The other survivor was Lygia Sibaris, a 25-year-old stevedore thrown into solitary confinement after a bar brawl. His cell was built from massive thick walls with very tiny windows, bomb-proof and poorly ventilated, making it the most sheltered building in the city of St. Pierre. He remembered a sudden darkness and a searing heat. I smelled nothing but my own flesh burning. I heard nothing but my own cries for help. Exhausted and terribly burned, he had to wait 3 days in the hot cell until a rescue team came for him. But he survived. All charges against him were dropped, and he would go on to live out his days as a circus attraction, the survivor of St. Pierre. On May the 20th, Mount Pelée erupted once more, this time accompanied with an earthquake. A further 2,000 people would die. That was enough for the residents of Martinique, most of who fled thereafter to neighbouring islands. Pelée continued to erupt over the following months, but at that time there was hardly anyone left on the island. As time went on, few came back and the population eventually grew to about 1,000 inhabitants. They continued to dream about rebuilding their fallen town, but it was not to be. Mount Pelée would erupt again on September 1929, destroying any form of progress that was produced over the years. However, this time with no governor or local paper pressuring them to stay, locals were able to wisely read the signs and evacuate before any lives were claimed. Cave diving is an inherently dangerous activity. All cave divers understand the risks of diving in underwater caves and accept them as an inescapable part of the activity they are so passionate about. An expensive hobby, which buys a steep price. From time to time, divers die doing what they love doing most. This is Marson Ashley Kay's story. There's a place located in Burkesville, Florida, along Highway 19, that boasts a natural wildlife spring that attracts many year-round, accompanied by one of the world's most intricate and dangerous cave systems that lures the curiosity of cave divers. Weeki Wachee Springs is a natural tourist attraction located in Weeki Wachee, Florida. The spring was named Weeki Wachee by Seminole Indians, which means little spring, or the winding river in their language. On November 1st, 2008, the State Park of Florida took over the Weeki Wachee Springs as a state park. From May the 22nd to August the 20th of the year 2007, the discharge level at Weeki Wachee Springs dropped to a level to allow cave divers to gain an effective entry into the cave system that was located underneath the springs. The Karst Underwater Research Team successfully executed exploration dives and the necessary in-water decompression to explore approximately 6,700 feet in multiple passages. At an average depth of 265 feet of fresh water, with a maximum depth of approximately 407 feet. The 407 feet depth makes the cave system under Weeki Wachee Springs the deepest known freshwater cave system in the United States. But that being said, as beautiful and as majestic they are, they can be quite dangerous and even deadly. There have been numerous deaths in the spring over the years, and it just goes to show that nature can be quite lethal. Marson had two loves, working on computers and cave diving. Having had a successful IT career for 6 years, working in information technology for Life South Community Blood Center, all the whilst continuing to dive. Marson was described by his family and friends as a daredevil who enjoyed cave diving and surfing, and even tried his hand at skydiving. Personal recounts from his mother record a time when she expressed her dislike for the sport to Marson. He would then go on to reply, "Mum, if I ever die caving, that's the thing I love the most." 29-year-old Marson Kay was conducting a research dive with Karst Underwater Research in Weeki Wachee's main spring area on March the 31st, 2012. He, along with 5 other divers, entered the water shortly after 4:30 p.m. and descended into the springs to an open cavern area about 175 feet down. The open cavern contains several tight rock formations at a depth of about 100 feet. These tight formations would be the cause of Marson's horrific demise. The following information, based on eyewitness and forensic evidence that I'm about to share with you, provides some insight into this tragic accident. Weeki Wachee Spring is extensively developed into a tourist attraction that features underwater mermaid shows with a submerged observation area. The spring vent is in the large pool used for mermaid shows. Following the last mermaid show of the day, the group geared up and prepared to execute their dive. It takes many hours of planning to carry out this dangerous exploration that takes them miles back into a cave. On March the 31st, 2012, an enthusiastic Marson Kay, now a 2-year veteran of KUR's all-volunteer team, accompanied by the KUR, were performing a series of dives at Weeki Wachee Springs, which included entering and exiting the cave system. They entered the water just after 4:30 p.m. and swam 178 feet below the surface. The water was peaceful on top with a deep blue hue. Turtles and fish swam around the man-made decorations and air hoses. The spring pool measures 165 feet east to west and 210 feet north to south. The spring has an intimidating entrance that is deep, accompanied with an outrageous flow of water that cannot be described. Finally, a massive and beautiful cave below that only a handful of people have had the opportunity to experience. An experience Marson and his team were about to witness as they descended the Weeki Wachee waters. Following a successful dive into the cave at 180 feet, Marson Kay signaled to the team that he was now exiting the maze of tight formations. To exit the cave, one must get out through the miserable entrance. This is the more daunting task of the system. To leave, one must ascend from 180 feet through a horrible flow of water. From that point, a half-inch braided wide rope leads upwards to 142 feet, where the crevasse area of the cavern begins. Although the cave narrows at this point, the rope, now coloured orange with a diameter of 7/16 of an inch, is placed in the largest easement leading to a depth of 68 feet, where daylight clearly can be seen at all times. Instead of following the ropes as he had done multiple times in the past, Marson rapidly moved into a highly restrictive area of the crevasse. It is believed that this behaviour was not a calculated decision, but a reaction caused by the effects of an embolism he incurred while rapidly ascending from depth. According to the coroner's evaluation, Marson developed a cerebral arterial gas embolism prior to his death. Typically, this condition causes profound changes in mental functioning, including disorientation, blindness, paralysis, seizures, and loss of consciousness within minutes or even seconds of onset. If it occurs after surfacing, it is often fatal or profoundly disabling even with prompt recompression therapy. When it occurs underwater, the incapacity or unconsciousness it causes almost always results in drowning. Although safety divers were in visual contact and the additional safety gas cylinders were in place, he rapidly pushed himself upward into an area where even side-mount divers could not easily access. Several attempts were made to communicate by means of light signals as well as touch contact. His fellow divers tried to pull him, but couldn't. Although Marson was still moving at this time, he did not directly respond to these communication attempts. They quickly swam to the surface and alerted the other researchers. A rescue dive team plunged back into the water, but when they reached Kay, just 3 minutes later, his mask was on his forehead and his regulator was out of his mouth. He had already died. A subsequent review of his equipment indicated that Marson had approximately half of his gas supply remaining in both of his tanks, and his regulators appeared to be working properly. The medical examiner determined that Kay did not drown, as some initially speculated. The cause? An air embolism from surfacing too fast. An air embolism is essentially an air bubble that blocks an artery and cuts off the blood supply to part of the body. In Kay's case, authorities say, the bubble became lodged in his heart and prevented blood from flowing into his lungs. Yet another tragic ordeal that highlights the dangers of cave diving. Cave diving is always a risk many are willing to take. It's unfortunate that inevitably lives will be lost in the process of pursuing their passion, but we can appreciate that they died doing what they loved, something not everyone can say they experienced. In New Mexico, there is a very deep body of water that formed after a sinkhole filled with water. It's become a very popular diving site over the years because of the clear blue waters above the hole. But at the bottom of the hole sits a very small opening. It can be compared to the drain of your sink. This hole is just barely large enough for divers to fit through with their tanks. Once through the hole, the diver would be met with countless networks of tunnels and caves that have never been explored before. In 1976, 2 divers were exploring that section of the blue hole when they unexpectedly got lost, leading to their deaths by drowning. Once down there, the police would have a hard time locating the bodies because they started to get lost as well. After the bodies were brought up to the surface, the police conveyed to the owners of the land that the specific section of the cave is way too dangerous and no one should be allowed down there until it has been professionally mapped. The owners eventually deciding to seal off the hole by bolting down a large metal gate before layering boulders on it. They chose this method instead of getting the cave mapped to avoid any more unnecessary fatalities. This would not stop curious divers. In 2016, a diving organisation called the ADM Exploration Foundation, that goes around the world mapping caves, reached out to the landowners of the Blue Hole and offered to professionally map out the forbidden section of the cave. The owners were hesitant, but eventually granted them permission. It should be noted that this would be the first time in 40 years that anyone entered the forbidden section. On March 26, 2016, the gate and boulders were removed. The Blue Hole was now deemed open. Shane Thompson, one of the divers, a part of the group, was a former diving instructor for the US Navy before becoming an advanced scuba instructor in San Diego, all of which added up to 20 years of diving experience. Shane was given the role of a safety diver, who would stay on land while the other diver, Mike Young, would go down first and explore the upper sections of the cave. But on the morning of the dive, as Mike Young entered the water, a couple of minutes later, Shane would follow. He recalls, as he was making his way down the main cavern section, looking up and seeing Shane swimming down towards him. This puzzled Mike, but he figured someone must have told Shane to come down with him. So he didn't think much of it, and both Mike and Shane continue on swimming down. Each meter they descend, the darker it gets, until eventually squeezing their bodies through the tiny entrance that led to the pitch-black forbidden section. Not being able to see anything, they immediately turn on their high-grade flashlights, but as they continue swimming down, more and more silt is starting to be kicked up. The cave had not been explored for 40 years, so everything that had settled was now being thrown in the faces of Shane and Mike. Their lights would prove to be non-effective. Being the experienced cave divers they were, unfazed, they kept slowly moving forward until Shane spotted a tunnel to the right of them. Based on what they could see, it seemed that at the end of this tunnel, about 30 feet down, there was an opening that led to a much larger cavern. What they did not realize is that the tunnel started wide, but eventually goes down to a point. So they start making their way down this tunnel. Silt is now being more aggressively thrown into their faces, so they can't tell that the space is getting narrower and narrower. This was not an easy hole to fit through. As they get closer and closer to the hole, they suddenly get stuck. Shane gets stuck first. Mike, following behind him, could not see this and gets crammed between Shane's leg and the wall. Staying calm, Mike begins to slowly push himself backwards to become unwedged, but Shane begins frantically kicking in panic. Mike continues to slowly move back, while Shane, still in total disarray, begins moving forward, squeezing himself further down the narrow opening, until he was forced into the cavern on the opposite side. Mike, now safe in the main hallway, waits for Shane to do exactly what he did, move himself backwards out of the tunnel. But when Shane didn't show up, Mike went back down looking for him. Now back at the tiny opening, Mike pokes his head through and scans his light, but could not see Shane anywhere. What he did see was different exits that lead out of this cavern through tunnels. Mike was now in a moral dilemma. He wanted to go look for Shane, but this section of the cave was unexplored and he didn't know where any of the tunnels led to. He figured Shane couldn't have gone far, so he began squeezing himself down this hole for a second time. Barely making it through the hole, Mike, now in the cavern, points his flashlight up and continues swimming through the widest tunnel he could see. The tunnel continued to wind and wind until it came to a dead end, where he would see Shane, deceased, with his mouthpiece out of his mouth. Knowing the risk of doing a body recovery alone, Mike would have to make the treacherous trip out of the cave to alert the authorities to assist with Shane's body recovery. It is said that when Shane squeezed himself through the hole, he was so disorientated upon being thrusted into the cavern that he thought he had turned around somehow, and the tunnel he was now looking at was the way out, which we now unfortunately know was a dead end. After Shane's body was recovered, the forbidden section was resealed and has remained closed to this day. Yet another story that shows us the dangers that come with cave diving. In open water, if you're in trouble, you swim up. In a cave, it's a different story. Regardless, rest in peace to Shane. Gone but never forgotten. The Byford Dolphin accident is one of the most horrific accidents in recent human history. The 4 divers who were inside the decompression chamber that fateful day. British men Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas, alongside Norwegians Bjorn Bergersen and Truls Helvik, could not even comprehend their horrifying ordeal, as the initial blast would have killed them in a fraction of a second. This is the Byford Dolphin accident. Put yourself in the following situation. You just scored yourself a job that pays $30,000 up to $45,000 per month, but you work 100 meters beneath the sea, a place as strange to sunlight, where temperatures can plunge to freezing conditions. All of the hours you do have off are spent in a small confined metal tube. In this metal tube, there is basically only two things you can do to pass the time. You may choose to eat, or you may choose to catch a few hours of sleep before your next 8 to 10 hour shift begins. Then it's time once again to dive back into the abyss. Visualize yourself living like this for months at a time. Welcome to the strange world of saturation diving, one of the world's most dangerous and well-paying jobs. In 1969, a humanitarian ship called the Ocean Viking stumbled upon one of the largest oil pockets in the world. Hoping to capitalize on this find, the Norwegians began extracting 1.6 million barrels of crude oil a day. This was the driving force in the economy we can see today. Prior to this, in the 1960s, the Norwegian economy was what you could call underwhelming. Simply put, the country was quite poor, with its economy based mainly on fishing, the export of wood, and hydroelectric power. One of the most important gas pockets in Norway is located in Frigg. Frigg is a field in the central part of the North Sea, straddling the border between the UK and Norwegian sectors, with the waters having a depth of around 330 feet. To extract the gas, the government hired BP, or British Petroleum, an oil and gas company headquartered in London, England, who in turn contracted a company called Dolphin Drilling, an offshore drilling rig company headquartered in Aberdeen, Scotland. The engineers of Dolphin Drilling were faced with the intimidating task of how to safely extract the oil, since the distance from the surface to the sea floor is 328 feet and the gas pocket is located 6,070 feet below the water. The solution, a semi-submergible stabilized column drilling rig. They called it Byford Dolphin. Weighing 3,000 tons and manned by a crew of 100, it was capable of drilling in waters up to 1,510 feet in depth. It was equipped with advanced drilling equipment and could maneuver with its own engines. To allow construction and maintenance of the wellhead at these depths, the rig was also equipped with a sophisticated saturation diving system built by French firm Comex. Of the 100 crew members, 6 were divers, accompanied by 2 dive tenders. Dive tenders tend to the needs and wants of commercial divers. The divers were tasked with the repairs and maintenance of the submerged section of the platform, as well as the drill and extractors when they were in operation. A job more complex than most can imagine. Apart from being excellent welders and mechanics, the divers worked in very extreme conditions due to the depth at which they operate. On Saturday, the 5th of November, 1983, at 4 a.m., while drilling in the Frigg Sea gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, 2 of the divers, Bjorn Bergersen and Truls Helvik, were on the ocean floor working on an oil well when the team was told that bad weather was amidst. Bergersen and Helvik then proceeded into the diving bell that would pull them up to the decompression chambers. The bell was then raised to the surface and clamped to a walkway called the deck, which led to the chambers. Bergersen and Helvik set their wet gear on the deck and entered Chamber 1. Coward and Lucas were resting in the second chamber at the time. The usual steps of this procedure was intended to follow this order. First, close the door of the diving bell. Second, a supervisor will slightly increase the bell's pressure to make sure it seals tightly. Third, close the door that connects the deck and the diving chamber. 4. Slowly depressurize the deck. And the fifth and final step, separate the bell from the chamber system. The first 2 steps occurred with no issues, but for some reason unbeknownst to the crew, Crammond released the clamp before Helvik closed the door to the chamber. This caused an explosive decompression from a pressure of 9 atmospheres to 1 atmosphere. Air rushed out of the chamber with tremendous force, jamming the interior deck door and pushing the bell away. Crammond was killed while the other dive tender, Mr. Saunders, was severely injured. All 4 divers were killed from the explosive decompression instantly. Helvig was in the process of securing the inner door when he was sucked through the 24-inch diameter opening of the jammed door, causing him to be violently dismembered. His abdominal section was split and his organs were ejected from his body, except for his trachea, a section of the small intestine, and the section of the spine. His insides exploded all over the area, one section later being found 30 feet further vertically above the exterior pressure door. During forensic investigations of all the divers, large amounts of fats were found in their arteries, veins, and organs. It was found that the rapid change of pressure was so strong that it caused the divers' fat to separate from their blood. It is still not known why Crammond released the clamp too soon. The community in charge of investigating the situation had 2 conclusions on the cause of the accident. One being human error. At the time, the only communication the tenders on the outside of the chamber system had was through a bullhorn attached to the wall surface, with heavy noise added from the rig and sea. The men also worked very long hours during those times, sometimes up to 16-hour shifts, which caused a lot of fatigue. The other cause was concluded to be the company's failure to build a safe hatch into the rig system. If fail mechanisms were present, the crew may have been spared their fate. Built in 1975, the Byford Dolphin was not equipped with fail-safe hatches, outward pressure gauges, or an interlocking mechanism which would have prevented the deck from being opened while the system was under pressure. The North Sea Divers Alliance, formed by early North Sea divers and relatives of those killed, continued to press for further investigation and, in February 2008, obtained a report that indicated the real cause was faulty equipment. Initially, families were told that the blast was an accident caused by air escaping from the diving bell because gauges had been tampered with. Claire Lucas, daughter of Roy Lucas, said, "I would go so far as to say that the Norwegian government murdered my father because they knew they were diving with an unsafe decompression chamber." The families of the divers eventually received compensation for the damages from the Norwegian government 26 years after the incident. The Byford Dolphin rig is still in operation, currently on contract with British Petroleum, and saturation diving continues to be widely used in the offshore oil industry, consistently ranking among the most dangerous but well-paid jobs in the world, with many divers receiving up to $1,400 per day. While safety measures and accident rates have improved significantly since 1983, the Byford Dolphin incident stands as a bitter reminder of the dangers that always come with living and working in extreme environments, more specifically, saturation diving. If you've made it this far, I just want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If this is the type of content you enjoy, I would like you to consider subscribing to my channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future uploads. If you have any suggestions, drop a comment down below and let me know what it is. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.